Something I've been spending a lot of time on recently is jobs to be done and sort of the intersection of Bob Mesta and Clayton Christensen's version. They talk about jobs to be done as people hire products to make progress in their life. And I think when we do a lot of talking to customers, and I see people struggle with this, is we ask them, like, what do you want? What do you want in your resume? I want better control of the margins. It's like, that's not what they need. Ultimately, their job to be done, their progress that they're trying to make in their life is land the job. And I think I see a lot of people like hone in on this very specific thing. There's a push to solutioning, getting stuff out and feeling like you're making progress, but you might be hurting yourself and you're actually not helping your user. You're giving them what they want. I often call it like French fries or broccoli. It's like we need to get them to eat the broccoli. So how do you blend the broccoli and put it in this mixture for the French fries for your kid? But you kind of got to give them the French fries also. And it's like, what's that trade-off of helping them make the progress in their life? How do you tease out what they're actually trying to achieve?
Hi, and welcome to Minimum Viable Podcast, where we go beyond the surface to explore the depths of product creation. Think of this as a masterclass in innovation, combining deep insights, perspectives, hands-on analysis, where we'll cover topics like the psychology of user behavior and the aesthetics of design and the timeless principles of storytelling. I'm your host, Elliott Poppel, and the founder of General Collaboration. General Collaboration is a cross-app inbox for all of your comments from all of the tools that you use at work. So that way, you'll always be focused on what needs your attention most. Without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. So, Dave, we first met actually at a pretty funny time. It was just the beginning of the pandemic. You were relatively early in your Teal journey, and I was interviewing for a PM role. I don't know if you knew this about that time that we were talking together, but not only is the pandemic just kicking off, but I was actually in Japan at the time. So we had no idea what the hell we were doing. Me and my wife were on this pseudo vacation, and I'm talking to you at ungodly hours from the other side of the world. But funny that we're now talking on this product management podcast where I was originally interviewing to be a PM on your team. We didn't wind up going with that path, but we stayed close since. We share an investor now. Thank you so much for joining on the show. You've got an incredibly unique background. I was impressed by it then when interviewing with you. I'm still impressed by it now. You started your career as an architect, and now you were building software. Hell of a path. Let's go all the way back and start there. And in your past life, you built physical spaces. You were an architect. Now you're building software. Tell us about that transition. But more importantly, how has your understanding of physical spaces shaped that influenced your current approach to designing digital experiences at Teal?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the intro. Thanks for having me on the show. It's funny to sort of think back to those times when we first got going. I've always liked making stuff. And I think, this is really informs why I'm doing what I'm doing today, is how we sort of arrive at the careers that we do. And I think a lot of it is exposure we get in early days. My dad was a builder. He's an immigrant from Cuba, and he just sort of stumbled into construction at some point. That's the job he could get when he dropped out of college after one semester. And so he was in buildings. I grew up in buildings, and buildings was kind of the thing, but I liked art and drawing. I was like the art kid, drew the cover to the yearbook, did murals in the school, loved comic books, worked in a comic book store. My uncle, who was a graphic designer, gave me my first computer. My dad thought computers were stupid. So kind of the intersection of all those things really are a shaping of who I am today. I went down that path because when I told my dad I wanted to, there's a funny little moment when I went to my high school college advisor. And I was like, hey, I want to do those drawings, those cool car drawings, with the thick lines and what I know today to be the Pasadena School of Design. And she's like, that's a mechanical engineer. And I was like, okay, awesome. And I go home and I tell my dad, I'm going to be a mechanical engineer. He's like, no, you're not. He's like, that's math. You're like an art kid. And I was like, okay. And I was like, well, how do I want to go to art school? And he's like, no, you're not. You need a real job. And I was an entrepreneur. I was selling paintings and trading comics and making money off all that stuff. So I was like, all right, fine. Architecture school is an in-between. And I had been working for him through high school as a construction estimator, doing all sorts. I grew up, I was on in diapers on job sites. And so that was, kind of like the intersection of my interest in building things, making things. I did a lot of carpentry, and, kind of to fast forward to today, what I realized is I like building. I don't really care that much about buildings. It was just a mechanism to build. And what I realized as I was more and more in the practice, it just took too long. Like, I don't have the attention span for 10-year projects, 15-year projects. That's how long buildings take to, by the time you get the approvals and the drawings and all this stuff. And you don't ultimately get to do your own thing. You're like working for clients all the time. And so between those combination of things, I gravitated more and more in my career to building. And then my medium was technology and digital interfaces over buildings.
That's an incredible journey. It's knowing that eventually this leads to your first startup, but it also leads to WeWork. I imagine that juxtaposition of building versus buildings, nobody was building faster. Nobody was building buildings faster than WeWork was building buildings. So you kind of got to have your cake and eat it too there, right?
Yeah, it's ultimately why we sold Case to WeWork. So Case was our consultant. Well, a little bit of my career journey was I studied architecture, went to school for 7 years, got a master's in architecture, was also teaching. And I went to a school that was very digitally oriented. I went to Columbia's Graduate School of Architecture and Planning and Preservation, GSAPP, I think. And while I was there, I really went kind of in disguise as someone who wanted to be a digital designer. Because Joe Kosinski, who has recently directed Top Gun and did Tron before that, taught the 3D advanced visualization course. And that's why I wanted to go. I wanted to learn 3ds Max. I wanted to do like really cool renderings. And I thought I could like be a movie set designer, which was kind of this like in between. I got there. Luckily, I had a lot of advanced credits and I was able to waive out a lot of the things, but I audited his course. And I got to meet him and get to know him, but I wasn't actually in his course, and he left that after that first semester of mine. But while I was there, I just really dove into a lot of stuff. They were sort of famous for their paperless architecture. It was really these outlandish, cool, theoretical things. I was using software like Maya and 3ds Max and scripting and different languages and building websites, and learned how to do video editing. And so it was really all about like technology. And buildings were this thing you got to explore technology, and that's when I really realized like the physical act of the building wasn't as interesting. I did kind of take a foray into digital fabrication and how like the bits become bricks through CNC milling, 3D printing, all sorts of cool stuff like that. So it was always making, and a little bit of sort of a throwback to my days of carpentry and stuff. But yeah, there I really saw the speed at which you could make things in computers. And I love technology. And so from there, I then worked at a really cool architecture firm that was a very digitally oriented architecture firm. They're called Shop Architects in New York, and got to do a lot of cool things there. Was there for 2 years and fell in love with what's called now building information modeling, which is the idea is you build buildings in the computer first. So kind of measure twice, cut once. And we could, there's all sorts of issues with the building process, but did that, fell in love with that. And then quickly was like, I want to do this for other people. Like I tried to actually launch a consulting business within their firm, and they kind of weren't having it. I'd only been there 2 years. So I was like, all right, whatever, I'll go do my own. But also what happened, which is I'd say like a few things happened there that like really got me into like digital interfaces, was I was tasked with building the company intranet in SharePoint, which is awful. But whatever. We ended up building it in Drupal and all sorts of other things. But we landed doing Google's first ground up building, and which never got built. They built it now with another firm. But I read John Battel's book Search and really got excited about technology and the growth. This was in 2007. And I had an idea for a startup. It was this like social search site to find vendors. A buddy of mine that worked at Shop, his name's Federico Negro. He ended up being my co-founder. And then Steve Sanderson, we got excited about that. And that's what we were going to go do. We raised some money from friends and family. But we knew that couldn't like fund what we wanted to do. So we started a consulting business, which was more in line with our expertise, which was teaching architecture firms how to do what we did at Shop. And that was a consulting business that ended up doing well. We acquired the startup. We paid back our friends and family. And that's the company that ultimately WeWork acquired, because they hired us as a consultant to really build out infrastructure and systems to help them scale. So even though it was buildings, we were building software and systems to make buildings faster. And so to fast forward to your question, the long answer to your question is we sort of Adam came to us and said, how about you guys bring together your knowledge of digital interfaces with the effort of these physical buildings, and the team that is designing conference rooms interacts with the team that's designing the app to book conference rooms. And we make this unified experience, because those teams don't really interact with each other that much. And so it's like, how could we think of the buildings as like iPhones or Teslas and have this unified digital and physical experience? And so that was our remit. That was exciting for us, which is ultimately why we sold the company to them.
Tell us about that WeWork acquisition. How did that come about? How did you get introduced and have that opportunity in the first place?
So it was through a mutual connection of ours, Jesse Middleton.
Cool.
When I was the startup was called Who by You, and it was this idea of like social search. And I posted on Twitter again, 2007, early 2008, that I was testing out this new like web app that would help you like sort of leverage your network to find services. We ended up expanding it beyond construction, which was a mistake. They do say the riches are in the niches, and they're right. But we were, sort of silly young founders thinking that that's too small. Anyways, that was a learning. So you could find anything on this tool. You could find a beautician. You could find an accountant. We got this like database of 16 million businesses, which was my early learnings on SEO, which has proven to be super valuable now. But we were building that, and I was posting it on Twitter, and Jesse responded. I don't know if he had like location filtering or what, but him and I ended up meeting for coffee, which then he invited me to WeWork After Dark, because he was really involved in like WeWork Labs. I met Matt Champagne, and that's how I got introduced to WeWork. And I used to go and work on the front end code, and I was doing a lot of the design for Who by You at night. I was single, living in New York, and I would go after my architecture job to, or doing some of the consulting, depending on what it was. I'd get to the WeWork on Grand Street at 8 p.m. at night and stay there till 2 a.m. and hanging out with those guys. And then I met Kyle O'Keefe, who's Miguel McKelvey's brother, who worked within WeWork. And, I'd show him the stuff I was doing on Who by You. And then one day he's like, hey, that stuff is like your day job, like not the thing that you really want to be doing, the other thing that's kind of like temporarily holding you over until you think this tech startup makes it big. We'd be interested in that. Like, we're going to be building a lot of buildings. We want to do it in innovative ways. We don't want to do it just like the old fashioned way. Could you come in and talk to us about that? And so I did. And then their team, and they did a lot of things internally. So their team started to hire services of Case. We trained them on how to use a software called Revit, which is like the Figma of design for construction, unlike AutoCAD, which is, whatever. I'm not going to try to find an analogy, more like Illustrator. And we started to work with them, and little by little, they were our largest client, and we were doing all sorts of stuff with them. We worked with them for 3 years. We probably had half of our company, which was 60 people at the time, working on WeWork projects. We acquired a 3D scanning company so we could 3D scan the spaces after they got renovated. So we had very accurate drawings. We were doing all sorts of really cool, crazy stuff, which ultimately they said, well, why don't you guys just come internal? And we were their first acquisition ever.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like there must have been a moment in time when you realized that you saw things differently. You're this architect getting into this digital product world. What happened there? Did you ever feel out of place in the startup world, or was it always that, did you realize early you had a competitive advantage?
No, I definitely felt out of place. I felt out of place in the sense that like I wasn't an engineer, so I was more of this designer, but I also, the architecture upbringing is like very different. As much as they talk about like user centricity, they really don't, right? Like architecture school really focuses on making these gestures that ultimately like show up on the cover of magazines, or, have some sort of cultural impact on a city. But they don't really talk about like the effect on the user, which was one of my sort of beefs with architecture and why I like digital products so much better. I mean, two things: you can iterate when you mess up. And it's like, the saying etched in stone, like literally these things are made of concrete. They're very hard to change, Where digital products, you can A/B test, you can do different things, you can iterate, and you can really focus, you can and help people, which is a lot of the stuff we tried to do at WeWork with physical buildings. But that was a tricky transition.
So, Dave, what lessons have you learned from designing collaborative physical spaces, and how have you applied them now to Teal's platform?
I would say a lot of what is immediately transferable are like the technical skills I learned. I actually tell people like architecture is one of the best educations you can get, and maybe not one of the better professions. That's obviously super subjective. But if I look at the technical abilities that one of my classmates came out of a school with, or even today, someone who graduated from Columbia today, and what like a UX designer is coming out of a boot camp with, that UX designer might make like $100,000 and it's $80,000. That architecture student with a master's degree might make like $50,000. And then they're like, that UX designer in 4 or 5 years is making 150. In 4 or 5 years, that architect's making 80. But they're in terms of like their technical abilities, I would say the architecture students just know so many things. I mean, I knew how to 3D model. I knew how to do video animation. I knew how to do like Illustrator, AutoCAD. They just come, because you just learn. You just like, you're willing to do anything. So there's kind of like a relentlessness to tackle and research and a work ethic of hard work and a real passion for the craft. Say a lot of people now, there's aspects of that people can do that come with privilege. And if you look at the demographics of architecture, it's not great. So there's that, but you do come out with this kind of like work ethic. And I think a lot of that did translate over. If you don't learn things like how to talk to customers and how to, do research and see what people are really trying to achieve, because you're one level removed, right? In architecture, you're oftentimes working for a client who then has users of the building, but you're serving the client, which is the developer or the university owner, but you have this like abstraction layer that's tricky. So that was something to get past, actually, that you could actually interact directly with the user versus this intermediary that is your client, but not your customer. Your customer in the sense of the person actually using the thing. Or, if you talk to like jobs to be done folks at Rewired, they would talk about it as customers and consumers, right? So your customer is the developer, your consumer is the occupant of the building. And so that was a kind of interesting transition to do that. And then the scale was very different. This idea of like these environments that you live in and the feelings are different. Like you think about the way a space affects somebody in terms of it being big or tight, and compression and expansion and light, but interfaces can have a similar kind of feeling. So you do think about the sort of balance of form and function and aesthetic, and sometimes aesthetic can compromise function. And so those things I think are just like first principles of design, like absolutely translate.
Would love to take a second for you to share what Teal does. I'm a huge fan of Teal. I think you know this too. You helped my wife make the biggest career jump she has made in her career trajectory so far. So when we met and I was interviewing with you, she became a user and huge impact. Let's share what Teal does.
Oh, awesome. I didn't realize it was that impactful. That's amazing. It has changed a lot since she used it. So Teal today, let me talk about the ambition for Teal. Teal will be with people from the day they start working to the day they retire. There is a huge gap between the technology and systems that the enterprise has and the employee has. And most of the technology for employees is B2B and it serves the company. And it doesn't go with people from job to job, right? If any of the listeners here, if they look at their phone and say, what tool am I using on here to manage my career? It might be Notion. Maybe. There is no tool that's like purpose built. But when you look at other aspects of your life, your finances, your health, your water consumption, like you name it, there's some kind of like tracker for all these aspects of our life. But the career, which somewhat like makes it all possible because it's our top line and how we make money, assuming we're like an FTE and not an entrepreneur or something. But even still, it's my job. Like, am I doing my job well? And what is that objective advocate that helps me do that? That's what Teal's aiming to be. Today, because that's a long journey and I've got some real scar tissue on the distribution side, I said, where do we, like, I went on a hunt for pain when we were starting Teal. And so today our tools are really focused on the job search, because that's when people take action, which I think is a big learning on product development. Is like getting people to change behavior is super, super hard. That was one of my big learnings on Who But You. So where could we intervene in someone's life where we could help them make progress, but getting them to change behavior like wasn't insurmountable, but led to this broader career journey? And it was the job search. Like there's a lot of precedent. There's things that people have to make, like resumes. There's things they have to do, like interviewing. And so there's enough of a process. There was things we could draft off of instead of needing to do net new things. And so today, Teal is very focused on the job search and helping people run an effective job search. It is for consumers. It is not for businesses. We don't interact with companies really. We want to be on that side of the marketplace for as long as possible so we can stay true to our mission, which is empowering people to grow their careers on their terms. So that's kind of a little bit of like the vision and what we're doing today. Functionally, we've got tools like a resume builder that's AI powered, that matches with JDs, that really helps people show the 10% of them that's 100% relevant to the jobs they're applying to.
I think one of the biggest learnings that you just shared, it was one of the biggest places we got punched in the face on my second startup, was realizing that you need to meet customers at that moment of need. My last startup was an on-demand pharmacy called Robin Health. We delivered prescription drugs on demand, and our primary user was female head of household moms, or who's picking up prescriptions for the family for the most part. We were trying to convince mom to remember us, that you can't convince mom in some random moment, because there's going to be a time when your 3-year-old kid has strep throat and you need a Z-Pack and it's 2:00 in the morning and she's not thinking about you then. What was your path to that learning, and what have you zeroed in? What are the points that you focus on now where you acquire users?
Yeah, so we had the smart insight with the starting of the company to focus on the job search, but then we sort of lost our way. Right, in product, there's often like, are you selling probiotics or pain pills? And we were smart and like, okay, we're going to focus on the pain, but we're going to sell them probiotics instead than just giving them the Advil. I'm an Excedrin person, but anyways, so we created this like tracking productivity tool. It still exists today. It's our job tracker, but we're like, this is the thing. This is the thing that's going to guide people. It's going to give them every step and like help them be super organized, because that's what they need. Mm-hmm. It's not what they wanted. I was talking to someone once and they said, Dave, you're selling broccoli. Like everyone knows you should eat broccoli. It's like healthy, but like you're selling broccoli. And I was like, that's right. And so that was the problem, right? Like I'll make up these numbers, but of like the world of 100% of job seekers, maybe 10% wanted to be organized enough. Like the other 90% are just kind of like winging it, trying to get it done, applying to jobs. And then of those 10% that were like using a Google Sheet or a Notion or an Airtable, 1% were like, this isn't good enough. I need a purpose-built tool for that. So it just didn't land. Like the people that use it, like, this is cool. It has a Chrome extension. It did all sorts of things. And so there's a moment then we said, okay, wait a second. What do people need that they have to do? And there's a little bit of like founder dogma at the beginning. I was like, I'm not going to do a resume builder. Resume builder is stupid. That's like, everyone's got a resume builder. I'm going to be competing with Google Docs and Microsoft Word. Like, no way, impossible. And, but there was an existing market there, and there was proof that people have to make a resume. Like, 99.999% of job seekers need a resume, even if it's a referral. There's like, hey, send me your resume. Like, you gotta have it. It's a requirement. And so like, okay, let's attach ourselves to that, and let's see if there's opportunities to make that different and better. And because we had been so involved in the job search, we did come up with a new angle that was different to the resume, that wasn't just sort of a version of Google Docs that said it was for resumes. It's truly different in that what we've built is a career index, a way for you, a career information management system that you can happen to pull resumes off of. it's got longevity. It's tied into our broader vision of having all your career information in one place that you can then sort of like peel views off of. If you're thinking about like a database and you make like a view of a database, that's essentially what it is, which has then allowed us to integrate really nicely with the job tracker. And it lets people just like pick the things they want to highlight versus needing to rewrite entire resumes, and allows it to be really smart. And so it was a different angle. We have this idea of a base resume, and people really like it. And it is more efficient. It takes a little bit to get set up and going, which we're working to make better. But like once people have it running, it's way more efficient than Google Docs or using a Word document. And, Google volume on searches is like 50 million queries a month for resumes versus like a few thousand for job trackers. So we said, okay, let's find a market and build a product that the market wants versus trying to, people get really excited about like category creating. Category creating is for suckers. Like like attach yourself to an existing category and then you can like do it incrementally. But like trying to do it from scratch is super hard.
So would love to hear about how did you go about building that first MVP, and what did that entail?
So the journey, I hadn't done a lot of job searching in my life, to be honest. I worked for my dad through all of high school. I mean, I'd also worked at a comic book store. I worked as a manager at the dairy department in a local natural food market. So I had like applied for jobs. I had been an employee in family, out of family. Luckily, one of my teachers at Columbia was hiring, and I ended up landing a job with him, which was a weird experience. Like life is about all these weird experiences. He double booked my first interview with one of my classmates. So he actually like interviewed us both at the same time, which is like a great story to be like, interviewing is weird. He hired me. So I got that job. And, and then I started a company, and which got acquired, which is a different kind of experience. And so I hadn't done like a traditional job search too much. I had helped a lot of people with their job search. And so when I left WeWork, I was an executive. I ran a 4,000 person organization. I said, how could I really empathize with users? And so as I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, WeWork did their first round of layoffs before COVID. And like a lot of these people I had hired and, or were my students or who knows what. And so I started job searching for people. Like I started like, all right, cool, let's go. I'll look for jobs for you. I'll write your resume. I'll work on it like manually. I'll build a tracker in Google Sheets. And then I made one in Airtable. And then I started doing stuff in Zapier and Typeform. I made email addresses for people so I could apply to them. And we both had the credentials and I could feel the rejections. And so I just like literally walked in their shoes, like, doing the process. And then from there, bit by bit, COVID hit, which actually totally derailed what we were doing, and we had gained all this knowledge. I was actually charging people $200 a month to job search because I wanted to see if people would pay for it. I had a lot of like anxiety around WeWork and being spendy. I'm like, I can be the guy. I'm not just the guy that spends a lot of money to build a lot of buildings. I can make revenue. I mean, I was in charge of sales at WeWork also, but we can make money, not just like, produce it and spend it, but not actually generate profit. So I was very focused on, I also wanted the pressure testing of like, will people pay for it? Like, cause I wanted this consumer centric approach. So people were doing that, but then COVID hit. And so everyone was like losing their jobs, and it was a very different customer. This person who's like unhappy in a job and like looking for a change and had income and could afford to pay for it and just didn't have the time. So all that knowledge I had gained, I said, okay, how could we help more people, right? You were getting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people losing their jobs. And so we pivoted into like courses, which is where I met your wife, and these cohorts and because I was a teacher at Columbia and I knew how to create like technical content and teach people how to use tooling and process. And we probably stayed in that for too long, honestly, because you sort of get like, it's tricky to stop things in startups. You have inertia and momentum. But there's where we started to build tech. Like we had these like no code or templates. We said, how could we actually build interfaces around that? That's when we eventually built like the job tracker. We built a lot of things that don't even exist today. And like bit by bit, we saw like what were people gravitating towards of these like templates that we made, and we turned those into software over time.
So Dave, what's something that you believe strongly about talking to customers about user centricity that most people might disagree with?
That's a great question. One of the things I did at WeWork was really invest deeply in learning about like lean and lean manufacturing. And it's interesting to see some of those themes either literally or somewhat like translated surface in product. Something I've been spending a lot of time on recently is jobs to be done, and sort of the intersection of Bob Mesta and Clayton Christensen's versions, which obviously they collaborated on it together. And Greg Engel, don't want to drop it, Greg. But they talk about jobs to be done as people hire products to make progress in their life. And I think when we do a lot of talking to customers, and I see people struggle with this, is we ask them like, "What do you want?" Right? And they say, "Oh, so what do you want in your resume?" I want better control of the margins. It's like, is that really? That's not what they need, right? But you kind of have to give people what they want in a way. But like ultimately, their job to be done, their progress that they're trying to make in their life is land the job. And I think I see a lot of people like hone in on this very specific thing because they can wrap their hands around it. And so it's like when you do that and you focus on the outcome that the user wants, you can abstract it and you can live in problem space a little more, right? So there's a push to solutioning, getting stuff out and feeling like you're making progress, but you might be hurting yourself and you're actually not helping your user. You're giving them what they want. I often call it like French fries or broccoli. It's like we need to get them to eat the broccoli. So how do you like blend the broccoli and put it in this, in the mixture for the French fries for your kid? But you kind of got to give them the French fries also. And it's like, what's that trade-off of helping them make the progress in their life? How do you, tease out what they're actually trying to achieve? So in lean, there's this idea of like 5 whys and really understanding like what the person is trying to achieve, right? So why do you want the margins? It's like, oh, well, because I want better control of, how it looks. Well, why do you care about how it looks? Oh, well, because someone told me that like the ATSs like mungle up the resumes. And it's like, oh, really? Like, why do you think that's the case? Oh, well, because I saw someone on LinkedIn that said that. And it's like, okay, got it. So then you can kind of like understand your concern that this is happening. Let me actually show you in this tool how the text is what matters the most and the keywords are what really matter the most. And that's like what a recruiter is screening for. And that's why you use this functionality. It has nothing to do with the margins. And so I think doing that extra work to hear the why, like what's the person trying to achieve? And then you see like what the end destination is. I also think we're really good at kind of partial progress. We've had that struggle internally where I'd say like, hey, what do you think this person's trying to do? It's like, oh, they're just trying to create a resume. It's like, no, they're not. Just having a resume doesn't help them land a job. They're trying to land a job. They're trying to land a job that is like better than their situation they were in before. The resume is a partial progress. It's a task in that bigger thing. But ultimately, they're trying to land a job. That's what we need to keep as our North Star. And then there's going to be other, obviously trying to be happy and fulfilled in life is like the highest altitude. So you got to find like the right altitude that you think about those things. But I think teasing out what is the person really trying to do and jobs to be done. There's a lot of different flavors of it now, but if you go back to kind of the originators of it, I think has some really great lessons and techniques on how to do that.
Talking about these, French fries versus broccoli, and less so a product management tactic, but thinking of product managers looking for jobs. I think one thing that I see most frequently as I'm helping friends, family members on their job hunt is people, and margins are one thing, people love to send their resumes into the abyss of LinkedIn or lobbing them into companies. And it seems like that's relatively fruitless. Is that one of those French fries that you're dealing with at Teal? And how have you solved for that desire to submit versus desire to lean on your network and do like that harder work? Is that a part of Teal's product?
Yeah, it's a good question because it's the thing about to go with that margins example is it's a process in which people feel really out of control, right? I don't ultimately decide. And so people gravitate towards things they can control in this uncontrollable process. So applying to jobs online feels very much in your control. Sending a cold email to network is out of your control. You feel like a sense of rejection. They didn't write me back. What if so applying, it's like conclusion. I submitted it. Now, I may not get accepted, but I feel like I made progress. I can set a goal of 10 applications a week, and like I can do that. I can see that through. That's not to say they're not entirely fruitless. I think there's a lot of variables that go into that. The time by which you apply. If it's after 2 weeks, I would say generally don't bother. Not always. All these things. It depends. But if we're going to say like 80-20, a lot, especially bigger companies, maybe at startups, you're sort of, your post has been open for 2 weeks and no one's even seen it. And you're like, why can't I get more candidates? If you're Facebook, it's the opposite. You get 10,000 applicants within 2 hours. So I also think be mindful of like how you're applying, where you're applying. The generalities in the job search advice space are not helpful because everything has like some sense of nuance and context. But I think, it's kind of like an all of the above, but you also have to understand, like, play to your strengths. There are people that are naturally good networkers. So it's like, great. Those people should network. They're probably not as like diligent with writing because they like to talk and yap it up a little. Then there's going to be folks who like networking is like terrifying for them. And so it's like, yeah, just like apply online, and if you can do both, great. But like figure out your 80-20. There's no silver bullets. It's really different. But what I would say is most important is do the things that you're confident doing, do the things that help you show up in the best light. I think self-awareness is probably the most important. I mean, in careers more broadly, but also in the job search, and just play to your strengths, consistently play to your strengths, and don't feel like you have to do things that set you up for failure because they're unnatural. Now, if you're saying, hey, I want to build those muscles, well, great. The job search is an awesome opportunity to build those muscles and to practice and to do it, but do it because you want to, not because you feel like you have to. That comes through immediately.
Mm-hmm. So, love to switch gears a little. What are one or two massive mistakes, thinking back to earlier in your career, Case, WeWork, whenever, one or two massive mistakes that you made early on that you'll never forget? And what did you learn from those?
So the first one is value yourself. I'd say when I first I've lived in like a perpetual state of imposter syndrome. I was the youngest executive at WeWork. I had an architecture degree. People with like MBAs and executives at Fortune 100s. And, I'd show up to these executive meetings and be like, what am I doing here? I'm going to get like outed as someone who doesn't know what they're doing. And because, I would see these logos and of like these people that worked and had all these experiences. But at the end of the day, like my biggest learning is a lot of us don't know what we're doing. No two businesses are exactly the same. There was executives there that had worked at media companies and they would bring these like media analogies. It's like, oh, this is like that. And it's like, nah, not really. It's like every situation is new. Obviously pull from your past experiences, but those experiences are super valuable. And you do know a lot and you can add value. And so that you've got to be confident and that we're our own worst enemy. And people aren't thinking about us as we might think as much as they are. Like we're an afterthought, but I think we like build it up in our own heads. A good example is I thought when I left WeWork, now I was like, oh, I'm so important. Like this place is going to like crumble without me. They didn't miss a beat. It was fine. It was fine. Like the next day I was like forgotten, and that's okay. Like, it's like in the sense, like we're important, we can contribute, but also all these like life will move on, and so so take chances, take bets, try things. If they don't work out, they don't work out. But I would say like recognize you add value, understand like how you weave in, and don't compare yourself to others. I think like those things held me back, and I would go through sort of periods of time where I felt real bad about myself and my ability to contribute. The second was like not fall too in love with your ideas. I think as early, like Who But You as an example, I was so convinced that people wanted, I saw people doing it all the time. Like don't dilute yourself in these activities and that actually result in like people wanting a product and that they'll change behavior. So, I saw that people asked for their friends for an accountant, right? It's like whenever I was looking for an accountant, I would send texts. Like, of course, I trust my friends. And I was like, I'm going to build a software that does that. Well, little did I realize that only happens once a year. And there's already a known behavior to send a text. Your phone number's already saved. We're similar. So building software on that was just not realistic. It was practically impossible. Restaurants, you go out once a week and you're looking, and you sort of get tired of asking your friends and you feel bad. So there was an opportunity for software, i.e. Yelp, Foursquare at the time, all those things. So just because you have this like perceived idea that the world wants it and you think it's a good idea, it doesn't mean it's one, a product, and then two, a business. So like like a product is not a business. They're very different things. And even like product market fit is not a business. And so I think like when you're building product, it's very easy to convince yourself that you're onto a thing, but it's not a thing that can pay people salaries, can like self-sustain itself. And so ultimately you need to be building a business, and the product is part of it. The idea is part of it. The execution's a big part of it. The go-to-market is a part of it. People like to say it's like, oh, distribution first or product first. It's like, it's not a binary. It's all of the above, always. You got to get all, obviously if you're not building a product that people want, they're not going to like it. But if people don't know about it, then they're not going to use it, no matter how amazing it is. I think we gravitate towards like these 1 in a millions. Clubhouse. Oh yeah, I want to be the next Clubhouse. Well, where's Clubhouse now? And so I think just like do the hard work. It takes a while, and focus on the things that people really need, where there's pain, and they're willing to pay.
What was it like coming to that? It sounds like you had a little bit of that moment with Teal. What was that aha light bulb moment of you've been building the thing that you wanted to build, your original idea, but hey, there's this problem over here that needs to be solved?
Yeah, we tried a bunch of different business models, like a lot. And it's mostly working now. We've got a lot of things to figure out right now, but there's a product in the market. People sign up for it at a reasonable CAC and pay us 3 to 4x that CAC over their lifetime. So in terms of like unit economics, it's working, and it's happening at large numbers of over hundreds of thousands of people a month signing up for Teal. And it was, again, like really focusing on what people need, but shaped in a way that addresses what they want. And we tried these like courses, because we also had some like first principles. We want to make this accessible. And so it's interesting, like we were offering an almost identical version of what On Deck was offering. It was a job search course. They even hired one of our people, and they were charging $15,000 for something we were charging $400 for. And it was interesting, like our issue was a packaging problem. Like we weren't like, it was that amount of volume. Like the program your wife went through was like no different. Now they had great people and great mentors, but in terms of like content and delivery, not that different. I mean, literally, they hired one of our coaches that ran that same project, that same product. And she went there to write the curriculum, similar to ours. I'm sure, it wasn't like pound for pound exactly the same, but we didn't want to do that. We didn't want to do this like white glove, high touch experience. We wanted to make something accessible that anybody could do. And, this idea that technology is going to do it. I don't want to hire a bunch of coaches. No, nothing against coaches, but it's just not, the economics don't work, when you have to pay humans to do this work. And so that didn't work, and that wasn't really scalable, and cohorts were tricky, and it worked during COVID. But, I also think we got a little bit misguided because the world was so different. Then the world sort of reverted back to a little bit of normalcy, and those things that were working don't work anymore. And you kind of have seen that shake out in the business world. So I think it's like changing quickly. We let things carry on too long because we were kind of doing it. And so I think making those hard decisions was tricky. But ultimately, we went back to something I had sort of like written off was a freemium model. I was like, no, consumers won't pay. I had tried this like affiliate thing. I had tried time boxing, time trials, but we finally got the ratio right of like free to paid, what we gated, how we gated it. And there was enough product, or like enough features that ratio was right. And we got the pricing right enough. We have to continue to iterate on those things. Another thing we did was like by understanding our users, we made our pricing weekly. No one has weekly pricing, right? Because that's not great for the business. Like ideally, especially if you're venture backed, that's like the worst possible thing you could do for retention, to introduce a weekly plan. But for our user and understanding like where they are in their life, it's the right thing to do, right? We let you turn off recurring payments at the checkout. No subscription business who's like trying to expand LTV does that, right? Of course, it hurts your revenue, but it's what's right for our users. So, I used to sort of be in awe of these companies that would say, let's do the right long-term thing, the right, stay. And I would be like, no one has that ability to do that. But now that I'm actually living it, there are ways to do it. Like finding these things that you're going to not compromise on, that are sort of, obviously there's a lot of things that have to happen. You have to have great investors that believe in your mission, or, the capital to do it. So it's not trivial, but if you find the right partners that believe in the long-term vision, and there's a few things that you can say, I'm unwavering on this. In our case, it's been being for the consumer. Everyone I talk to is like, why aren't you B2B yet? Well, there's so much precedent for B2B, the job boards, there's just so much money to be made on B2B. I'm like, I hear you. It's a great plan B. We're on this side of the marketplace, and no one's pushed us anyone who's like on the inside who has influence has pushed us to do that. And so I think, get clear on like what really matters to you, stay focused on those things, continue to iterate, and then go to where there's existing precedent. Like another learning was like, find other things people are paying for, instead of trying to invent something new. So that was a little bit of research we did. And so that's when we end up, landing on the resume. We knew everyone needed one, and we got the right ratio there. There was precedent of people paying for resume building software with different sets of features. We learned from that, not in the sense of like a competitive analysis, but like that was proof that people were willing, instead of trying to create a market, drafting off an existing market.
Dave, this has been so insightful, hearing how your architecture experience, how your time founding Case, your time at WeWork has all culminated into this really awesome time you're having building Teal. Where can people follow you, and where can people learn more about Teal?
Yeah, so I'm most active on LinkedIn. So it's just /in/David Fano. Post there pretty regularly, and I try to answer as many comments as I can, even the nasty feedback ones sometimes. And that's definitely one of the things I did not expect with building consumer software. You get people that love it, and then you get people that hate it, no matter what you do. And Teal, just head on over to Teal, like the color, HQ.com. It's a free tool. Anyone can sign up, give it a whirl. Would really love feedback. Any of the onboarding emails you get, if you reply, they do come to me, and I will try my best to answer them.
Love it. Thank you so much for joining us on Minimum Viable Podcast today, Dave. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Elliott.